I'm Rachel Miller, 29 years old. And for 7 years, I was the daughter who paid everything in silence. Medical bills, mortgage payments, even my brother's debts. I covered it all while living in a tiny apartment in Chicago. I thought it meant I belonged, that I was loved. But on Christmas night, as the candles flickered and snow piled against the windows, my parents looked me in the eye and said, I wasn't even part of the family. What happened after? And the one sentence I finally said that silenced the entire room changed everything. Do you want to know how one Christmas dinner turned into the moment I reclaimed my life? That Christmas table looked picture perfect, with the tree glowing and plates full. Yet beneath the laughter, I already felt the quiet edge of being out of place. The snow kept piling against the windows as the conversation carried on. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself not to let my mother's words take root. It was Christmas. After all, this night was supposed to be about family. Yet even as I reminded myself of that, the truth pressed in on me. For years I had been pouring every ounce of energy into keeping this family afloat. And somehow I was always cast as the one who thought only of herself. Michael was telling a story about a client at his insurance job, his voice booming, his hands gesturing in that confident way that had always earned him attention. Dad laughed, his face lighting up, and even Helen's eyes softened as she listened. Daniel jumped in with a joke about how boring insurance sounded, earning another laugh. I smiled politely, adding a small chuckle, but nobody turned toward me. Laura finally glanced down the table. How is work for you? Rachel, you mentioned last time that you had a big project. I nodded, grateful someone had asked. It went well. I was promoted to senior analyst last quarter. That's great, Laura said warmly. Michael smirked, swirling the wine in his glass. Must be nice when you have all the time in the world to dedicate to spreadsheets. Some of us have kids to raise. Sophie piped up with pride. Daddy always helps me with my math homework. Everyone chuckled, except me. I felt my cheeks heat. Not from the wine, but from the subtle dismissal in my brother's words. Dad tried to bridge the silence by carving into the turkey and passing the platter down. As plates were filled, Helen spoke again, her voice carrying over the clatter of silverware. You know, Rachel, sometimes I worry about you. 30 is right around the corner. No husband. No children. Work is fine. But life is more than a paycheck. I gripped my fork tighter. I'm 29. Mom, not 30 yet, and I'm happy with my life right now. Her smile was thin. Happiness can be temporary. Family is what lasts. Daniel snorted. You sound like a commercial dup. Mom. Everyone laughed. Even Dad. I forced a smile. But inside, the words scraped at me. Happiness can be temporary. Did she really believe I was destined to end up alone? That the years of supporting them financially meant nothing because I had not checked off the boxes she valued. Laura passed the mashed potatoes my way, her hand brushing mine as if to steady me. Her kindness almost undid me. The children were bickering over who got the bigger piece of pie when Dad raised his glass again. Let's be thankful, he said, his voice loud and proud. For another year together. For health. For family. Everyone echoed family. The word sat bitter on my tongue. I thought about the credit card bills I had paid without anyone knowing, the student loans I had helped Daniel with, the mortgage payments I had slipped into their account. Was that not family? Michael leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach. This is the best turkey yet. Mom. Hiln bim de him. Thank you, sweetheart. I caught the exchange, the warmth that passed between them. So different from the coolness she showed me. It was not new. But on this night, under the glow of the Christmas tree, and with the snow falling like a silent witness, it felt heavier. I sipped my wine slowly, letting the burn calm me. Every holiday I told myself I would not let it get to me. Every holiday I failed. Ethan tugged on Laura's sleeve. Can we open gifts now? Soon. Honey, she whispered. Let's wait until after dessert. The table buzzed with chatter about past Christmases. Michael recalling the year his bike was hidden in the garage. Daniel talking about his first guitar. Each story circled around the boys. Their accomplishments. Their memories. I searched my mind for one I might share. But each time I tried to speak, another voice rose louder. Eventually I stopped trying. Helen's eyes found me again. I just think, Rachel, that it is time you stop running yourself ragged with work. You should be here more. Invest in what matters. What mattered. I had been investing for years. In all of them. Quietly. Without recognition. My throat tightened. But I kept my tone even. I am here. Aren't I? She gave that same smirk. And the conversation moved on. But her words lingered like a cold draft across my back. I focused on Sophie, who was showing Ethan how to fold his napkin into a triangle. Their innocence softened something inside me. They did not know about the tension, about the ledger of sacrifices that weighed me down. To them, I was Aunt Rachel, who brought gifts and, sometimes, cookies. Dinner stretched on. Laughter, louder, with each refill of wine. I smiled when expected, answered when spoken to. But I felt like a shadow at the far end of the table. The glow of the candles did not reach me. The hum of belonging passed over me. When plates were cleared and dessert appeared, Helen leaned toward Michael, complimenting his new promotion, praising Daniel for performing at a local bar. Her voice was warm, proud. Then her eyes flicked to me. And Rachel, still working late nights in the city. The room quieted for a beat, everyone waiting for my response. I set down my fork carefully. Yes. Still working. Still building. Her smile was sweet. Her tone cutting. Well? At least you can afford nice wine for yourself. A few chuckles. Then silence. My father cleared his throat. Let's open gifts soon. I stared at the flickering candles, willing myself to swallow the bitterness. The night was far from over. But already, I knew where it was heading. I was once again the outsider in the house, where I had grown up, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks widened. I had been here before. Not in this exact room with candles and Christmas china, but in the feeling of being surrounded by family and yet set apart from them. That sense of isolation had been building for years, long before tonight, stretching back to when I first left for college. In 2012, I arrived at the University of Illinois with 2 suitcases and a scholarship letter folded neatly in my backpack. The campus felt enormous, the brick buildings towering over me. But I was determined. I worked evenings at a diner on Green Street, carrying plates of pancakes and coffee for students who had more time to socialize than I did. Between shifts, I studied until my eyes blurred, knowing every grade mattered. A full ride covered tuition. But books, housing, food, those were on me. My parents never said they expected me to send money home. But the first call came during my sophomore year. Dad's pickup had broken down, and they needed help paying the repair bill. Helen's voice on the phone was hesitant at first, but it carried an undertone that told me this was not optional. I wired $300, money I had been saving for textbooks. I told myself it was temporary. 2 months later, she called again. This time, it was a medical bill. Insurance had not covered everything. I sent another $300. By the time I graduated in 2016, I had sent over $2,000 home. Money scraped from tips and tutoring sessions. My friends bought tickets to spring break trips in Florida, while I stayed back in Champaign, working doubles at the diner and telling myself one day it would be worth it. When I accepted a job at a Chicago investment firm right after graduation, I thought things would finally change. My starting salary was higher than anything I had imagined as a kid watching my father struggle through construction jobs. I pictured renting a real apartment, maybe even buying decent furniture instead of hauling my thrift store couch. Instead, the calls increased. The mortgage was behind. Michael's car had been repossessed. Daniel wanted to start community college, but financial aid did not cover it. The roof had started leaking. The furnace broke in the middle of winter. Every new crisis was framed as temporary, as if the next month would be different. In 2017, I was barely settled into my studio apartment in downtown Chicago when Helen told me their mortgage was late. I wired $1,500. That turned into $15,000 over the next few years. When Michael begged for help after his SUV was repossessed, I paid $9,000 to cover what he needed to keep it from being auctioned. He promised he would pay me back when his commissions improved. But he never did. Daniel called me in tears about tuition. I sent $7,000 so he could continue, only for him to drop out the next semester to play music gigs at bars. Then came the house. The roof repair cost $5,000. The furnace repair cost another $4,500. Dad's heart surgery, in 2022, even with insurance, left $20,000 in uncovered bills. I emptied my savings and took out a loan to pay. I lived in a cramped studio for 7 years. My furniture, secondhand. My car, a decade-old Honda. While thousands of dollars drained from my accounts into theirs. Each transaction came with the same mantra in my head. This is love. This is what family does. But sitting at the table tonight, watching them laugh together while ignoring me, I began to see the pattern differently. I had not been helping. I had been underwriting their lives, keeping them from facing the consequences of their choices. They treated me like a walking checkbook, a reliable solution, while mocking me for not fitting their mold of marriage and children. I thought back to nights I sat in my apartment alone, calculating how much I could spare. While outside my window the city lights flickered with opportunity I was too exhausted to reach for. My 20s had slipped by in a blur of overtime shifts and wire transfers. Friends bought homes, traveled, started families. I bought nothing for myself except time to cover someone else's emergencies. I could still hear Helen's voice from those calls. Honey, just this once. We will figure it out next month. Dad needs his medicine. Your brother is trying so hard. The guilt in her tone always twisted my resolve. I never said no. Even now, as I pushed food around my plate under the glow of Christmas candles, I knew the total: $20,000 for Dad's surgery, $15,000 for the mortgage, $9,000 for Michael's car, $7,000 for Daniel's tuition, $5,000 for the roof, $4,500 for the furnace. Numbers engraved in my memory like scars. More than $60,000 over 7 years. I stared down the table at Michael's confident grin, at Daniel lounging carelessly in his chair, at Helen whispering into Dad's ear with that same smirk. All of them carried on, as though my sacrifices had never existed. A sharp thought cut through me. What had I traded away? My 20s. My relationships. My peace of mind. For what? For a seat at this table where I was still the outsider. My hand tightened around my glass of wine. The laughter blurred into background noise. For the first time, the numbers I had carried silently felt like evidence in a case I could not ignore any longer. I had bought 7 years of stability for them, and in return I was met with ridicule and distance. The bitterness spread through me as steady as the snow falling outside. I had given up my youth for this, and tonight, I was finally beginning to ask myself if it had ever been worth it. The turkey sat at the center of the table, golden brown and glistening under the soft light of the chandelier. The candles flickered against the ornaments on the tree in the corner, casting tiny reflections of red and gold across the room. Sophie and Ethan's laughter floated through the air as they leaned over their plates, whispering secrets about which gift they hoped was theirs. For a moment, if I closed my eyes, I could almost believe this was the kind of Christmas I had once imagined as a child. Warm, safe, filled with love. But when I opened them again, the distance between me and the rest of the family felt impossible to ignore. Helen moved around the table with the authority of a hostess at a formal banquet, pouring wine into Michael's glass, patting Daniel on the shoulder when he cracked another joke. When she reached me, she set the bottle down without a word and returned to her seat. The space she left was heavier than silence. After dessert, Sophie bounced in her chair. Can we open presents now? Please. Her excitement was contagious. And everyone laughed. Dad nodded with a smile, and the children darted toward the tree. Wrapping paper crinkled, the sound filling the room with its own rhythm. Michael handed Dad a rectangular box wrapped in glossy paper. Dad tore it open, revealing a new set of tools. Michael leaned back in his chair. grinning. Thought you might need to update that old set in the garage. Helen clasped her hands together, her voice high with delight. Oh, Michael. That is perfect. Your father will use those all the time. Dad chuckled. Very thoughtful. Son. Daniel was next. He passed over a small photo frame. Inside, a picture of himself with Dad at a fishing trip last summer. Dad's eyes softened as he looked at it. And Daniel gave his crooked smile. Figured you'd like something to put on the mantle. Helen leaned across the table to touch Daniel's arm. That is such a meaningful gift. You know how much your father cherishes those memories. The room hummed with warmth. Everyone seemed wrapped up in the glow of Michael's and Daniel's offerings. I sat quietly, watching as Helen's face lit with approval, her pride unmistakable. When it was my turn, I slid the packages I had carried from Chicago across the carpet toward them. My chest tightened with anticipation. I had chosen carefully, walking through stores weeks ago, with their voices echoing in my mind. A gold necklace with a delicate clasp for Helen, a set of high-quality woodworking tools for Dad. I thought about the hours I had worked, the money I had pulled from my own savings, telling myself this year would feel different. Dad opened his box first. His eyes widened as he lifted the tools out. Polished and heavy, he ran his fingers along the handle, whispering that they were beautiful. I felt a flicker of pride. Helen unwrapped her necklace, the chain catching the light as she held it up. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then, she placed it back in the box and set it on the table. That is nice, she said flatly, before turning her attention back to Sophie, who was already tearing into her stocking. The moment passed without acknowledgement. No smile, no warmth, no words of praise like she had showered on Michael and Daniel. Dad murmured, "Thank you again," slipping the tools back into their case. But the energy in the room had shifted. I sat there, hands resting in my lap, the weight of Helen's dismissal pressing into me. Michael cracked another joke about how Dad could finally fix the squeaky step on the porch, and everyone laughed. The sound cut through me, harsh and sharp. My gift had disappeared into the background like an afterthought. Laura glanced at me from across the table, her eyes soft with apology she did not voice. She helped Sophie untangle a ribbon, filling the silence I could not. Inside, something twisted. I had spent hours choosing those gifts, had drained more money into this family than anyone would ever admit. And still, I was invisible. My brother's modest offerings were praised like treasures, while mine was brushed aside. The imbalance had always been there, but seeing it play out so clearly in front of me felt like someone pressing a finger into a wound I had been hiding. The laughter swelled again as wrapping paper piled high around the tree, and I realized I was sitting in the middle of my family, but not truly a part of them. I smiled faintly, willing myself to appear calm, though inside a storm was gathering. Tonight was confirming what I had feared for years. No matter how much I gave, I would always be the outsider, seated at the same table but treated like I did not belong. Dad lifted his glass and declared that he wanted to make a proper toast. His voice, warm and steady, rolled across the table as he thanked everyone for being there. For another Christmas. For another year together. The fire in the living room crackled like it was adding its own applause, and the glow of the candles seemed to agree with him. The children raised their glasses of milk with wide grins, clinking against the taller wine glasses, laughing as the liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rims. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe his words, to sink into the image of family gathered in peace, the kind of holiday I had always told myself we were having. But then Helen spoke, her eyes fixed directly on me as she raised her glass. Her voice was lilting, almost sweet, but her words were sharp enough to cut through the cheer. A daughter at your age should be thinking about a husband and children, not burying herself in 60-hour work weeks. The table quieted as if everyone had been waiting for her to say it. Michael chuckled, quick to fill the silence. No wonder you are still single. Rachel, who has time for a relationship when you are married to spreadsheets? His grin widened as if he had landed a clever punchline. Daniel leaned forward with a grin that was all teeth. Do you guys remember when she was little and used to make budget charts for her allowance? She would tape them to her bedroom wall, like she was running her own bank. Michael laughed harder, nearly spilling his wine. And even Dad gave a short laugh, shaking his head like it was a harmless quirque memore. But I felt heat rising into my cheeks as though the whole room was conspiring against me. I forced myself to press my lips into a small smile, pretending it was all in good fun. My hands slid under the table, fingers pressing against my palms to stop the trembling. The laughter filled the room, warm and unrestrained for them, but cold and suffocating for me. Helen sipped her wine, her gaze sliding over me with an expression of smug satisfaction. She did not need to say more. Her sons had done it for her. Laura cleared her throat softly. Shifting in her seat, she reached for the breadbasket, her hand brushing Sophie's shoulder, a quiet gesture that felt protective. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile, but she stayed silent. I did not blame her. She knew the balance of power at this table. Sophie broke the tension for a moment, waving a shiny bow she had pulled off one of her gifts. "Look, Mommy! I can wear it in my hair." Her innocent voice filled the room with joy, and everyone laughed with her, grateful for the distraction. I smiled at Sophie too. Though my chest tightened with something far heavier than amusement, Michael leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a grin that reminded me too much of our teenage years when he could charm his way out of anything. "Some things never change," he said, nodding toward me. "Rachel has always been obsessed with numbers," Daniel added quickly, smirking. "She still keeps track of every penny. That is just who she is." Their laughter came again, louder this time, spilling into the corners of the room. Dad shook his head, trying to play peacemaker with a light chuckle. "That's just Rachel," he said, as though I were an old joke everyone already knew. I stared down at my plate, my fork resting against the rim, the food untouched. I could hear the fire pop in the other room, the faint whistle of wind pressing against the windows. But all I could feel was the weight of humiliation. This was my family, the people I had poured myself out for year after year. And they were laughing at me as though I were nothing more than a punchline. I lifted my glass slowly, letting the wine steady me. My hand trembled despite the effort. I told myself not to speak, not to let them see how much their words cut. Silence had always been safer, but each word tonight etched itself deeper. Each laugh pressed harder against wounds I'd carried quietly for years. Helen leaned in slightly, her voice low but clear enough for the whole table. "A career is fine, Rachel, but don't fool yourself. It cannot keep you warm at night." Her eyes sparkled with something colder than the snow outside. Michael chuckled again, raising his glass toward me as if it were a toast. "Maybe next Christmas she will bring a boyfriend instead of balance sheets." Daniel laughed so hard he slapped the table, startling Ethan, who dropped a fork onto the floor. The sound of it clattering against the tile echoed in my ears. Laura bent to pick it up quickly, her face flushed with discomfort. "Enough," she whispered, but her voice was swallowed by the laughter. I sat still, smiling faintly, my back rigid against the chair. I felt small in that moment, smaller than I had ever felt in this house, smaller than I had even felt when I was 15 working shifts at the diner to save for textbooks while they teased me for being boring. It was as if time had collapsed, and I was once again the overlooked child, the middle one caught between a golden boy and a charming baby brother, trying and failing to be seen for anything beyond her usefulness. The room grew louder, their voices overlapping as they traded jokes at my expense. I nodded occasionally, pretending to share in the laughter, but my eyes burned. I stared at the gold necklace still resting in its box beside Helen's wineglass, untouched and forgotten. My gift, like me, had been dismissed. I pressed my nails deeper into my palm beneath the table, grounding myself with the sting. Around me the lights twinkled, the fire blazed, the trees sparkled, and still I sat frozen. When Dad finally called for another round of dessert, the noise began to shift back toward the children and their excitement. I exhaled slowly, almost trembling with relief. The storm inside me had not quieted. But for now, it was hidden. No one seemed to notice the silence in me. No one asked if I was all right. They carried on with their pie and coffee and small talk, while I sat there at the far end of the table, surrounded by everything that looked like family, but felt nothing like it. The clinking of forks and the murmur of small talk faded into the background as I stared at the twinkling lights on the Christmas tree. My mind drifted to a different apartment. A different December. Years ago, when I had still believed balance was possible. Mark Evans had been my partner for nearly 3 years. He was steady and kind. A civil engineer who loved hiking trips and Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. We met in Chicago through mutual friends. And for a while it felt like I had finally found someone who saw me beyond the numbers and the responsibilities. He liked the way I laughed at his dry jokes, the way I listened when he talked about bridges and projects that seemed boring to everyone else. I liked how he made the city feel less lonely. But as my family's demands grew heavier, Mark began to notice. I skipped dinners because Helen had called, panicked about bills. I canceled weekend trips because Michael needed help with his car payments. I stayed late at the office, not because I wanted to, but because I had to keep up with the workload that paid for everyone else's emergencies. One night, he came over to my studio. A cramped space, with secondhand furniture, and a view of the alley. I had meant to cook, but instead I was hunched over my laptop transferring funds for Daniel's tuition. He sat down on the couch, watching me quietly. Finally he said, "You are always working or saving someone else. Where do you fit into your own life?" I had no answer. I only knew that saying no to my family felt impossible. A few months later, he ended things. He said it gently, the way Mark always did, but it was final. He wanted a partner, not a caretaker for the world. I cried into my pillow that night, muffling the sound so the neighbors would not hear. The next morning I went to work, logged into my spreadsheets, and carried on. Since then, years had passed. Friends from college posted pictures of weddings in Napa Valley, baby showers in cozy suburban homes, vacations to Cancun and Paris. I scrolled through the images late at night in my little studio, telling myself I was happy for them. But beneath that, a hollow ache pulsed. I thought about the times I had walked into empty rooms with no one waiting for me, the quiet of my apartment settling over me like a heavy blanket. I had told myself I was independent, strong, successful. Yet the truth was that I had traded chances at love, at companionship, at a family of my own, for a family that never truly accepted me. My fork scraped against the plate as I blinked back into the present. Across the table, Michael was describing a new client he had landed, his voice loud and confident. Daniel leaned back with his arms folded, smirking at his own jokes. Helen listened with pride. No one noticed the storm rising in me as I thought about what I had lost. The memories pressed harder. Mark had once asked me to come with him on a hiking trip in Colorado. I had said no because Dad's truck needed repairs, and I had worked extra hours to cover it. He had once brought up the idea of moving in together. I had laughed nervously, saying I could not because I needed the flexibility of handling my own bills. The truth was, I could not commit to him when all of my commitments were already claimed by people who never asked what I needed. It hit me with force, sitting there at that table, that my loneliness was not only the result of long work hours, it was carved out by the expectations of my family, by years of choosing their crises over my own life. Every time I sent a wire transfer, I sent away another piece of myself. Sophie tugged at Laura's sleeve, asking when they could open more gifts. Laura smiled down at her daughter, smoothing her hair, her eyes warm. I watched the small scene, the ease of it, the bond that came naturally. A pang hit me so sharp I had to put my glass down before I dropped it. I would never know what my life might have been if I had been allowed to focus on building my own family. Instead, I had been an ATM machine disguised as a daughter. Dad coughed lightly, patting his chest before taking another sip of water. Helen fussed over him, placing a hand on his arm, her concern obvious, and still, my mind whispered, who had paid for the surgery that saved his life. The ache swelled into something closer to grief. Not grief for Mark alone, but for the years I had lost. The choices I had never been able to make for myself. My 20s had slipped through my fingers while I balanced ledgers that were never mine. The conversation at the table swirled on without me. Laughter rising again at something Daniel said. I sat quietly, my smile frozen in place. The storm inside unrelenting. For the first time, I let myself admit the truth. My solitude was not simply a byproduct of career ambition. It had been shaped, forced, and cemented by the very people who now laughed at me. And with that realization came a hollow certainty that chilled me more than the winter air outside. The life I might have built had been sacrificed on this altar of obligation, and no one here would ever acknowledge it. Laura was gathering torn wrapping paper from the floor, her hands busy as Sophie squealed over a new doll, and Ethan shook the box of Legos he had just unwrapped. The living room glowed with fairy lights strung across the mantel, and for a fleeting moment, the noise of the children seemed to soften the edges of the night. I glanced toward the tree where the 2 boxes I had brought from Chicago still sat beneath the lowest branches. Wrapped in thick red paper and tied with gold ribbon, my pulse quickened as I reached down for them. I carried the first one across the carpet and set it in front of Dad. He gave me a small, curious smile, his fingers fumbling at the paper until it came loose. The polished wooden case underneath caught the light, and when he lifted the lid, his face changed. Inside was the set of woodworking tools I had saved for, each piece shining, each handle smooth and heavy. He looked at me as though he could not believe it. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice rough. These are incredible." His eyes watered, and he touched the chisels with reverence, the way he might handle an heirloom passed down through generations. I remembered him pointing at a set like this in a shop window last spring, muttering that he could never justify the cost. Seeing his gratitude now almost made me forget the heaviness in my chest. Almost. Helen leaned closer to inspect, her expression tight. "Very nice," she said coolly, before turning her attention back to her wine. I swallowed, then picked up the smaller box and slid it across the table to her. She peeled the paper more carefully than Dad had, her fingers slow, until the velvet box appeared. She lifted the lid. A delicate gold necklace shimmered inside, the pendant catching the glow of the candles. I had chosen it weeks ago, picturing how it might look against her burgundy sweater, hoping it would be a way to bridge the distance that always stretched between us. Helen held it up to the light for barely a second before laying it back into the box, her lips pressed into a thin smile. "That is very nice, Rachel. Maybe you just wanted to show us how much more you can spend than the rest of us." The words fell heavy, cutting through the hum of conversation. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gratitude dimming under the weight of her tone. Michael glanced down at his plate. Daniel smirked, though even he seemed unsure whether to laugh. "I blinkade her," the necklace gleaming from where she had set it aside. "Unwanted." My voice came out quiet. "I only wanted to give you something special." Helen tilted her, sipping her wine. "You always think money can stand in for everything else. That if you buy enough, we will mistake it for love." The silence that followed stretched long and sharp. Laura's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down, her eyes fixed firmly on the children, who were thankfully distracted with their toys. Sophie hummed to herself while Ethan built a Lego tower, unaware of the tension crushing the room. Dad cleared his throat, his voice tentative. "Helen, that's not fair." Rachel was thoughtful. "These are beautiful gifts." But Helen would not relent. She set her glass down and leaned forward. "Hergatze unwavering. Generosity. Or performance. Sometimes, I can't tell with you." A flush crept up my neck, humiliation burning in my cheeks. My mind raced with memories of every transfer, every bill I had paid, every crisis I had covered. I thought of the hours of overtime, the missed dinners, the years of sacrifice, and here, in front of everyone, my mother suggested that my love was nothing more than vanity. The room seemed to fold in on itself. The fire popped in the hearth, a spark shooting upward. Dad's hand rested awkwardly on the tool case, caught between pride and shame. Michael fidgeted with his wineglass. Daniel smirked again. But this time, there was less conviction in it. Laura avoided my eyes. Her lips pressed tight. Helen's words echoed like a verdict. You think money can buy affection. You think you can purchase your place in this family. I forced myself to sit still. Though my hands trembled in my lap, the laughter and cheer of earlier had drained away, leaving only the chill of accusation. The necklace still lay in its box, untouched, gleaming like evidence against me. Dad tried again, his voice quieter. Rachel has always been giving. We should appreciate what she does. Helen turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. Or maybe we should ask why she feels the need to prove herself with every dollar she spends. The air in the room tightened, even the children quieted. Sensing something was wrong, Ethan glanced up. Puzzled. His Lego tower forgotten. Sophie leaned closer to Laura, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I swallowed hard, tasting the bitterness rising in my throat. My father's tools, my mother's necklace, years of sacrifices piled invisibly on the table. And still, somehow, I was being painted as selfish, shallow, manipulative. The silence that followed was worse than the words. It pressed into every corner of the room until no one could ignore it. The glow of the Christmas lights seemed dimmer, the warmth of the fire muted. I folded my hands together tightly, pressing my nails into my palms to ground myself. For once, no one laughed. No one teased. No one rushed to change the subject. Helen's accusation lingered over the table like smoke, staining everything it touched. And in that heavy pause, I realized that no matter how carefully I chose my gifts, no matter how much of myself I gave away, it would never be enough to change the way they saw me. Helen's wineglass was still in her hand when she leaned back, her eyes fixed on me with a look I had never seen so nakedly before. The corners of her mouth lifted, but there was no warmth, only something cold and satisfied. You were never really part of this family. The words sliced through the air sharper than any of her earlier barbs. For a moment I thought I had misheard. My chest tightened, my ears ringing. But her face told me she meant every syllable. I waited for Dad to speak, to push back, to correct her. He had always been the buffer, the one who softened her sharpness. But he didn't. He pressed his lips together, then exhaled slowly and muttered, "There are times when your mother and I feel like you are a stranger to us." It felt as if the floor had given way beneath me. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the china, startling Sophie. She looked up at me with wide eyes, sensing something had gone terribly wrong. Michael lowered his gaze immediately, staring at the tablecloth as if the pattern there could save him from choosing sides. Daniel, usually so quick with a smirk or a jab, sat frozen, his eyes darting between our parents and me, before he looked down at his lap. Laura shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face pale. She pulled Sophie close and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear. The children's smiles had faded, confusion replacing joy. My pulse pounded in my ears. I searched my father's face for some trace of regret, for some sign that his words had escaped him in a moment of weakness. But he didn't look back at me. His gaze rested on the tool case in front of him, as if the gleam of polished wood might distract from the cruelty he had just confirmed. Mom set her glass down with a soft clink, her expression calm, almost triumphant. She had finally said the words I now realized she had been circling around for years. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. My throat felt raw, my chest hollow. All the years of overtime, the transfers, the bills paid, the dinners covered, the loans taken out on my name, every sacrifice I had justified as love, and in one sentence, she stripped me of belonging. You don't mean that, I said quietly, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Helen didn't flinch. Yes, I do. You act like everything you give entitles you to something from us. But no one asked you to. Dad nodded faintly, his shoulders slumping as if the admission relieved him. You are different. Rachel. Sometimes it feels like you live in another world entirely. The room blurred for a moment. I blinked rapidly, trying to steady myself, but the faces around me wavered. I focused on the necklace still resting in its box, glinting under the light. Discarded like my place at this table. Daniel cleared his throat as if to speak, then closed his mouth again. His hands fidgeted in his lap. His usual bravado gone. Michael pressed his palm flat against the table. His jaw clenched, but he kept his head bowed. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them said a word. The betrayal was complete not because of Helen's words alone, but because Dad had chosen to stand beside her. For years I had told myself that at least he saw me. At least his gratitude was genuine. Tonight even that thread had snapped. I pushed my chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the silence like a warning bell. Everyone looked up. My heart hammered against my ribs, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to scream, to demand they look me in the eye and repeat what they had just said. But the words tangled in my throat. I stared at them. At the parents who had raised me, at the brothers who had let me carry them for years, and felt something inside me fracture. Helen picked up her glass again, unbothered, swirling the wine slowly. You see, she said softly, you don't belong here. Not really. My breath caught. The room had grown so quiet that even the children's fidgeting seemed loud. Laura's hand tightened on Sophie's shoulder. Ethan blinked, confused, his small voice breaking the silence. Aunt Rachel is family. No one answered him. The air felt heavy, suffocating, pressing down on me from every angle. I sat frozen, staring at faces that had been my world for 29 years. Faces that now looked at me as though I were an outsider intruding on their holiday. And for the first time, I understood that maybe I had been all along. The room felt smaller. The glow of the Christmas lights suddenly harsh against the shadows on everyone's faces. I pushed back my chair, the wooden legs scraping the floor loud enough to make the children flinch. My hands shook, but my voice came out even, calm, in a way that made the silence heavier. Perfect. Then, don't ask me for any more money. The effect was immediate. Helen's smirk faltered, the color draining from her cheeks. Dad froze, his mouth half open, but no words came. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping the stem of his wineglass. Daniel blinked, his easy grin vanishing, replaced by something uncertain. Laura stiffened and pulled Sophie closer, her arm tightening around her daughter's shoulders. I rested my palms on the back of my chair, leaning forward slightly. My heart raced, but I forced each word out slowly. You want to tell me I don't belong here? That's fine. But if I'm not part of this family, then stop treating me like your lifeline. The quiet stretched until it pressed against my chest. Helen finally spoke, her voice sharp. This is not the time, it is exactly the time. I cut in, louder now, because for 7 years, I have been the one paying for everything. And if I'm nothing to you, then let's put the numbers on the table. Dad's brow furrowed. Rachel, please, $20,000. I said firmly, my gaze sweeping across each of them. That's how much I covered for Dad's heart surgery last year, when insurance wouldn't pay. I emptied my savings and took out a loan. Dodds Aish fell, shame flickering across his face. $15,000 to keep the mortgage from defaulting. I sent it quietly, so the bank wouldn't take this house. Michael's hand dropped from his glass, his jaw tightening. $9,000 for Michael's SUV when it was repossessed. He promised to pay me back, but we all know how that turned out. Michael's face flushed, sweat gathering at his temples. $7,000 for Daniel's community college tuition. He abandoned after a semester to play music at bars. Daniel looked away, his knee bouncing under the table. $5,000 for the roof. $4,500 for the furnace, when it broke in the middle of winter. My voice cracked, but I pressed on. And then there's Christmas. Year after year. Thousands of dollars in gifts, dinners, travel, Every holiday you've enjoyed. Every detail you've taken for granted. I have paid for it. This Christmas alone has cost me nearly $8,000. The air went still. Sophie looked up at me, confused. While Ethan fidgeted with a bow from one of his gifts, Laura pulled them both close, whispering something soft, her eyes never leaving me. Helen's hand trembled as she set down her wineglass. That's enough. No, I said, my voice sharp but steady. It is not enough. Because you need to hear it. For 7 years I've been working 60-hour weeks, living in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture, driving a car that barely runs, while you sit here mocking me? And for what? To be told I was never part of this family. Helen's face twisted, panic and defiance battling across her features. I took a deep breath, my chest burning. You want to know why I keep track of the numbers? Because numbers don't lie. Numbers are the only thing that prove I was ever here. That I gave everything I had to people who treated me like a stranger. Michael wiped at his forehead, his voice low and unsteady. Rachel, come on. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. I snapped. Because every time there was an emergency, every time someone needed saving, the call came to me, and I never said no. Daniel muttered something under his breath, too quiet to catch. His hands twisted in his lap. Is bravado gone? I turned back to Helen, my voice quieter but sharper than ever. You said I was never part of this family. Then fine. Don't call me the next time the bank calls. Or the hospital. Or when Michael's car gets taken again. Don't ask me to cover Christmas. Or tuition. Or bills. If I'm not part of this family, then you don't get to spend my life like it's your credit card. Helen's lips parted, her face pale, but no words came. The fire crackled loudly in the hearth. The only sound in the room, my father's eyes glistened as he stared at the tool case in front of him. The gift that had moments ago brought him joy, now heavy with guilt. Laura shifted. Her voice a whisper meant only for me. Though everyone heard it, they needed to hear this. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the tremor in my hands, the sting in my eyes. For the first time, I had said it aloud. Every dollar, every sacrifice, laid bare in front of them. No one laughed now, no one teased. No one dared to meet my gaze. The numbers hung in the air. Undeniable. Unshakable. I straightened, stepping back from my chair, my body trembling, but my voice steady. You think I was never part of this family? You're right. I was never your daughter. I was your safety net. Helen's face crumpled. Edward's shoulders sagged. Michael wiped sweat from his brow. And Daniel kept his eyes down. Laura held the children close, her expression a mix of pity and quiet recognition, and for the first time in 7 years, the table was silent. I slid my hand into my purse and felt the envelope I had tucked there before leaving Chicago. It was meant to be discreet, something I would hand over quietly if bills came up, or if my parents hinted at being short again. Tonight it became something else entirely. I pulled it out and laid it flat on the table, pushing it forward until it sat in the center like another gift no one wanted. That will cover my share of Christmas, I said, my voice steady, each syllable deliberate. The reaction was immediate. Helen's eyes snapped to the envelope, then back to me, her face paling. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass, and for once she looked unsure of herself. I didn't mean it like that, she whispered, her voice trembling in a way that almost sounded foreign. I held her gaze, my tone sharp but calm. You said exactly what you meant. There is no need to pretend. Her lips quivered, opening as though to argue, but no sound came out. She closed them again and looked down at the tablecloth. Dad's chair scraped as he pushed back slightly, his hands flat against the wood as if he needed to brace himself. Rachel, please, he said, his voice low and shaking. Don't do this. Sit down. Let's talk. Talk about what? I asked, my chest rising and falling. About how you both decided I was never part of this family. About how you've lived off me for years while mocking me. There is nothing left to talk about. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his face red. He reached for his glass, then set it back down without drinking. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his foot tapping nervously under the table. Neither spoke. I reached for my coat draped across the chair and pulled it on slowly, smoothing the sleeves down with hands that no longer shook. For once, I wasn't trembling. I was certain. Helen's voice broke the silence again. Softer this time. Almost pleading. Rachel. I didn't want it to come out that way. I was upset. I said things I shouldn't have. I turned to her, my voice firm. You've said it in more ways than one. Over years. Not just tonight. You didn't slip. You finally told the truth. Her face crumpled, but I felt no relief in it. Dad stood halfway, his hand reaching out before falling back to his side. His shoulders slumped. Rachel, it's Christmas. Families fight, but we don't walk away. I looked at him, my heart aching, but resolute. Families fight. Yes, but they don't treat their daughters like a bank. They don't strip them of belonging after everything they've sacrificed. The words hung in the air. Dad lowered himself back into his chair, as though my answer had drained the last strength from him. I buttoned my coat one button at a time. The sound of the fabric snapping against itself loud in the silence. Around me, the room had stilled completely. Laura gathered Sophie and Ethan closer, whispering into their hair as if shielding them from words they couldn't fully understand. Michael and Daniel avoided my eyes, staring at their plates. The necklace I had given my mother sat in its box, the lid still open, the chain catching the light but untouched. I picked up my purse, the strap rough against my shoulder. The envelope remained on the table, untouched, an unspoken boundary drawn between us. Helen's voice wavered again as I reached for the door. Rachel. Wait. Please. He didn't mean it. I stopped with my hand on the frame, the cold air leaking in from the draft around the door. I turned back, meeting her eyes one last time. You made yourself very clear. You don't need to soften it now. Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together, no longer able to form words. Dad leaned forward, desperation flickering across his face. We can work this out. You don't have to leave like this. I shook my head, my voice keener now, but resolute. I do. Because I can't keep pretending this is family when you've all admitted it isn't. The room stayed silent, heavy, with everything that had been spoken and everything that hadn't. Laura's eyes shone, but she held her children firmly, keeping them safe from the storm. Michael's face was damp with sweat, Daniel's jaw tight with something between shame and stubbornness. I pulled the door open, the hinges groaning softly. A rush of icy air swept in, chilling the room. Snowflakes swirled outside, glinting under the porch light. I stepped across the threshold, the cold biting instantly at my cheeks. But inside me, something loosened. The door closed behind me with a final click. The muffled quiet of the house disappeared, replaced by the hush of snowfall and the crunch beneath my boots. I lifted my face to the sky, letting the flakes sting against my skin. For the first time in years, it felt light, as if the burden I had carried so long had finally slipped from my shoulders and been left behind on that dining room table. The city was still half asleep when I pulled into the small lot behind my apartment building in Chicago. Snow clung to the windshield, and the silence of the streets mirrored the strange calm inside me. My boots crunched against the icy pavement as I walked up the back steps and unlocked the door. The warmth of the radiator hit me as soon as I stepped inside, filling the studio with its familiar hum. I set my purse down, unbuttoned my coat, and sank onto the edge of the bed without even turning on the light. For the first time in years, I had walked away. No check left behind to cover the mortgage. No transfer made to bail out another crisis. Just the envelope on the table, enough to cover my portion of dinner. Nothing more. The relief was sharp and real, but it came braided with exhaustion. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and fell asleep still in my clothes. The snow outside continuing to fall. By morning, the spell of quiet was broken. My phone lit up with messages, the screen filling faster than I could clear it. Michael's voice came first, tight with panic. "Rachel, you can't just walk away like that. The bank is threatening to take the SUV again. They're saying, if I don't make the payment this week, it's gone. You know how much I need that car for work. Just cover this one last time. I'll pay you back." I hit delete before he even finished. The next voicemail was Daniel's. His voice wavered between confidence and desperation. "Hey sis. Tuition's due and they're saying I can't register for spring if I don't pay the balance. You've always been there for me. Don't let me fall now." I pressed delete again. Dad's voice followed. Softer, older than I remembered from even a few months ago. "Rachel. Sweetheart. The mortgage payment is due this week. Your mother and I. We just don't have it. Please. Don't let us lose the house." For years, those words would have had me on my laptop within minutes, calculating, transferring, solving. But now they landed differently. They weren't mine to carry anymore. I placed the phone face down on the table and made coffee. Listening to the steady drip of the machine instead of their voices, the smell of the brew filled the apartment, grounding me more than anything else. When the phone buzzed again, I almost ignored it. But the number on the screen wasn't familiar. A Chicago area code. I answered cautiously. "Good morning. Is this Rachel Miller?" The woman asked briskly. "My name is Karen. Calling from First Chicago Bank. This is regarding the Delaney family credit card account. Records show you're listed as guarantor. The account is delinquent, and we need to discuss payment arrangements." The words hit like ice water. My grip tightened on the phone. "Guarantor. That can't be right," I said sharply. "I never agreed to that," she replied smoothly, as if she'd said it 100 times before. "Our records show your signature on file. We can forward you a copy of the authorization. The balance is nearly $12,000 and several months overdue." I stood frozen in the center of my apartment. They had done it without telling me. Or worse, they had slipped papers under my nose years ago when I wasn't paying attention. Signing for them the way I always signed to keep things afloat. "No," I said finally, my voice firm. "I want to remove myself immediately. I will not be responsible for their debt." There was a pause. Then the woman's tone softened slightly. "You can request removal, Miss Miller. But until the process is complete, the account holders will be responsible for the balance. We'll send the forms." I exhaled slowly. "Let them handle it," I said quietly. "That's where it belongs." After I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. The radiator hissing behind me. The familiar weight of panic never came. Only resolve. The messages kept pouring in throughout the morning. Michael again, sounding more desperate, his voice cracking. "I can't lose the SUV. Rachel, you don't understand. Just this once. I swear I'll make it right." Daniel's tone grew angrier. "So what? You're just going to abandon me? After everything? You know I can't do this without you." Dad's final message was quiet. "Resigned. If you don't help us, we don't know what will happen." Each voicemail was a thread they were trying to pull. The same threads that had bound me for years. But I had cut them. I set the phone to silent and pulled on a sweater. I opened my laptop instead, sipping my coffee as the snow fell beyond the window. For the first time, the weight of my family's chaos was not on my shoulders. It was theirs. The calls did not stop. They grew sharper, more frantic. A mixture of begging and guilt, but I did not answer. I sat in the stillness of my apartment, listening instead to the sounds of my own life. The tick of the wall clock, the hum of the radiator, the scratch of my pen against paper as I began to sketch out my own budget, my own future, without factoring in anyone else's emergencies. For years, I had been their solution. Now, as the snow blanketed the city, I finally let myself believe it wasn't my problem anymore. The weeks that followed moved like slow water, steady and unavoidable. Calls from my family shifted from anger to desperation, then finally to silence. I began hearing pieces of their lives not from them, but through whispers that circled back to me from relatives and neighbors. Michael was falling behind on his car payments again. But this time there was no safety net. Laura, who had once smiled at me across holiday tables, now argued with him in front of the kids about overdue bills and dwindling savings. The image of their perfect family began to splinter under the weight of debt they could no longer ignore. Daniel, who had sworn he would make it in music, posted a picture one day of himself in a work uniform from a hardware store on the north side. His caption was simple and bitter, a half-joke about trading guitar strings for price tags. For the first time, he had to clock in full-time. Shelving boxes and stocking aisles, his late nights of rehearsals shrank, and with them, the illusion that someone else would pay for his dream to continue. Even Dad, whose pride had carried him long past retirement, picked up part-time consulting work with an old colleague. I heard he sat in a small office above a print shop, going through construction project reports for extra pay. The man who had once leaned so heavily on me now had to lean on himself again. The house itself began to tell the story too. A cousin mentioned that the furnace had gone out again, and without me there to write a check, they patched it with space heaters and blankets. The roof repairs I had covered the year before were already straining again, and this time they had to negotiate directly with the bank for an emergency loan. Each crisis that once came to me now landed squarely in their laps. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was something deeper. Karma was not fire and fury, it was quiet, methodical, like snow burying everything in silence until no one could pretend it was not there. Then, in early spring, I learned something that chilled me more than any winter storm. A distant relative sent me an email, not knowing the rift between us, and attached a draft copy of my parents' estate plans. In it, Michael and Daniel were to receive the bulk of what little wealth there was. The house, the savings, even Dad's old stocks. My name was there too, in small print, but only for a token amount. I had been nearly erased from the future, the same way I had been dismissed in the present. Reading those lines, I felt the familiar sting in my chest. All those years of paying their bills, keeping their roof secure, sacrificing my life, and still they had never intended to acknowledge me as equal. I set the papers down and stared at the window, the Chicago skyline hazy in the distance. For a long moment, I wanted to crumble, but then something inside me shifted. Their choices no longer defined me. Their will could leave me out, but it could not erase who I had become. That spring also brought unexpected light. My manager at the investment firm called me into her office one Friday morning, her smile wide. She explained that I had been invited to speak at a national financial literacy conference in New York. They wanted me to share not just about managing wealth, but about setting boundaries, especially with family. I laughed at the irony, but she touched my arm gently and said, "This is important, Rachel. People need to hear your story." The weeks leading up to the conference were a blur of drafts and rehearsals. I wrote late into the night, trying to find the words that could capture the years of strain. The nights I stayed awake worrying about bills that weren't mine. The moment I finally said enough, it felt strange to turn personal wounds into lessons. But as the speech took shape, I realized it was not just for them. It was for me too. The day of the conference, the ballroom lights were bright and hot, and rows of faces stretched out in front of me. Executives, advisors, young analysts fresh out of college. My hands shook as I gripped the sides of the podium. But when I spoke, my voice was strong. I told them about boundaries, about love twisted into obligation, about how numbers don't lie, but affection does when it is conditional. He didn't name names, but I told the truth. As I finished, there was a beat of silence before the applause rose. Steady and warm. People stood, clapping, nodding, some even wiping their eyes. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not from shame, but from something I had never tasted in my own family's dining room. Recognition. Respect. Reporters asked for quotes afterward, and articles appeared in trade publications the following week. My words were summarized. My story reshaped for headlines, but the message stayed the same. I was no longer the silent daughter who paid the bills in the shadows. I was a woman standing in the light of her own worth. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window and watched the city lights stretch endlessly. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with another message from Dad. His voice was hoarse, weary, asking again if I would call. I didn't press play. I left it where it was, the skyline glittering before me. My name newly printed in a program that would be saved on shelves long after this night. For the first time, I did not measure myself against their absence. I measured myself against the life I was building, one that no one could take credit for but me. And in that quiet moment, I understood something my family never had. My value had never been in what I gave away. It had always been in who I was. Snow was already falling when I pulled into the familiar driveway in Evanston on Christmas Eve of 2024. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but strings of lights glowed along the eaves, and a wreath hung neatly on the front door. For a moment, I sat in the car and let myself breathe. A year ago, I had walked away from this place with nothing but resolve. Tonight, I was coming back by choice. Not obligation. David reached over and squeezed my hand. "You ready?" he asked softly, his eyes steady on mine. I smiled, warmth rising in my chest, more than I ever thought I'd be. We stepped out into the cold, the crunch of snow beneath our boots echoing in the still night. The front door opened before we reached it. Helen stood there, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. She looked smaller, older. Her face softened in a way I had never seen. Edward appeared behind her, his expression unsure. But when his eyes met mine, they filled with something like relief. "Rachel," Helen said, her voice breaking. "I'm so glad you came." I nodded, stepping inside with David's hand resting gently at the small of my back. The warmth of the house hit me, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon. The dining room glowed with candles, the table already set. For the first time, I noticed that the chairs were evenly spaced. No one shoved off to the corner. Michael and Laura stood from the sofa, their children bouncing excitedly beside them. Sophie ran to me first, wrapping her arms around my waist, her voice bright. "Aunt Rachel, I missed you," Ethan chimed in, holding out a handmade card with snowmen scribbled in marker. "We made this for you." My throat tightened as I knelt to hug them both. "Thank you," I whispered, brushing Sophie's hair back from her face. When I rose, Michael cleared his throat. He looked thinner, more worn, but his eyes met mine without defiance. "We owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You were right to walk away. We had to learn the hard way." "But we did," Laura added softly. "Thank you for forcing us to face it. It saved us, even if it didn't feel like it at the time." Daniel came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He didn't look like the boy who once begged for tuition money. His hair was shorter, his clothes plain from hours of work, but there was a new steadiness in him. "I've been working full-time," he said simply, his voice carrying a mix of pride and humility. "It's not glamorous, but it's mine." I gave him a small smile. "That's more than enough." Helen stepped closer, her eyes wet. "Rachel, last year I said something I can never take back. I told you that you weren't part of this family." She paused, shaking her head. "That was a lie. The truth is, you've always been the heart of this family." I was too blind, too bitter to admit it. "I am sorry." Her voice broke, and for the first time in my life, she looked at me not as a child to criticize, but as a woman she respected. Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes damp. "We failed you," he admitted. "We leaned on you, used you. and then resented you for being strong where we were weak. I don't expect forgiveness right away, but I hope tonight can be a start." The room was quiet, except for the children's laughter in the background. David's hand found mine again, grounding me. I looked around the table, at the faces that had once treated me like an outsider, and saw something different now. Humility. Change. I took a slow breath. I'm here because I chose to be, and I'm here as your daughter and sister, not your bank. If we're moving forward, it has to stay that way. Everyone nodded, the weight of the promise settling in. Dinner that night was unlike any I remembered. The turkey was carved by Edward, but Michael poured the wine. Daniel passed the bread. Laura led the children in singing carols. When the bill for groceries was mentioned, Michael said they had all split it this year. Everyone had pitched in. No one left carrying it alone. David fit easily into the conversation, his laughter blending with theirs. Helen even asked about his work in marketing, listening without judgment. And later, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Thank you for bringing him. You look happy," she whispered. I smiled, my heart swelling. I am. When the gifts were exchanged, they were modest but thoughtful. Michael handed me a scarf Sophie had picked out. Daniel gave me a journal with a note inside that read, "For your story, because it deserves to be written." Helen and Edward presented me with a framed family photo taken years ago. Their way of saying I had always belonged, even if they had failed to show it. As the night wound down, I looked around the table one last time. The fire crackled. The children played on the rug. And for the first time, I felt the warmth of belonging without the weight of obligation pressing against my chest. Walking to the door with David at my side, I turned back. "Tonight mattered," I said softly, "because it shows that sometimes the harshest words we speak are the ones that save us. They don't just save us from others. They save the family too." Outside, snow drifted gently under the porch light, and I let myself feel at peace. If you've ever been forced to set a boundary with the people you love, if you've ever carried the weight of a family on your back and wondered if speaking up would break everything, I hope my story shows you the truth. Sometimes it takes the hardest words to build the life and love you deserve. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if this touched something in your own story. And if you want to hear more about family, fairness, and the strength it takes to protect yourself, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Your voice matters here, and I would love for you to be part of this community. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, your value isn't in what you give away, it is in who you are.